Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Todd. This is vlog number 3. We're on the roof of the Bellagio parking deck, self-park. We're on 3 lists currently, 1, 3, 2, 5, and 510. 510 is going to be a little game dependent. Depends on how many regs we're going to see at each table. If there's a good mix, I'm going to be happy to jump in there. But if it's a little too grinder heavy, I'm probably going to stay away, and I might even move to a different location if that's the case. So 100 big blind caps on the 1, 3, and 2, 5, and then 150 big blind cap on the 5, 10. So let's jump into the action. Let's see what happens.
It doesn't take long to find a playable hand. I'm in early position and look down at pocket jacks. I open it up to 30 and get a call from hijack, cutoff, button, and the big blind. So 5 ways to a flop. The flop is 10-7-4 with a couple diamonds, and this is a pretty dynamic flop. I think it's reasonable to check most of my holdings when we're this multi-way, but I also think my hand benefits from protection quite a bit. So because I'll be betting this flop so infrequently, I size up and continue for 120. It folds all the way around to the big blind, and he makes the call. The turn is the 7 of hearts, so the middle card pairs, which isn't great. But to be honest, when I bet so big on the flop and get a call, I'm mostly expecting my opponent to have somewhat strong top pair holdings and all of the drawing hands like 9-8 or 8-6. A diamond draw, or a combination of the two. Because I'm expecting to see those types of holdings most of the time, I continue for about half pot for 200. And without too much thinking, he min clicks it back to 400. In the short time this opponent has been playing, he's easily been the most active at the table, and this isn't the first time he's taken an uncommon line like this. From what I've seen, when he's min raised an opponent, it's been with a drawing hand each time, so with only about 300 left behind, I don't ever expect him to fold. And that being said, if he has a 7, so be it. I'm looking to charge his draw as the max, so I announce all in. He instantly calls. We see a river of the 6 of hearts, and he shows us the good news of 9-3 of diamonds. An assumed pro moves to the table with a healthy stack of 4,000 or so, and he opens middle position to 30. I'm in the big blind and look down at Jack 10 offsuit and make a pretty standard defend heads up. The flop is Queen 5-3 rainbow, and he continues for a small sizing of 20. I've been studying similar spots to this, and to be honest, I'm not completely confident in my strategy quite yet, but I do know there are plenty of somewhat unintuitive bluff candidates that solvers like when facing a small bet like this. In the moment, I decide this is one of those candidates with a backdoor straight draw, as well as some of the blocking properties, blocking both Queen Jack of diamonds and Queen 10 of hearts. So I put in a check raise to 90, and he makes the call. The turn is the 5 of spades, pairing the middle card. The other candidates I'm certain are included in the check raise bluff range include a lot of hands containing a 5, and plenty of the straight draw holdings that block a 5, like 8-7, 7-6, and 6-4. So I decide this is a decent turn to continue bluffing and bet around half pot for 130, and he makes the call once again. The river is the 4 of spades, so for all of the same reasons I just discussed regarding why I continue bluffing on the turn, I think it's reasonable to assume the majority of my bluff candidates are made hands by the river. So I decide to follow through for 250, and he thinks about it for about 10 seconds before sighing and putting in the call. I turn over the bluff to show we got caught, and he turns over ace 9 of spades. So he was clearly just a complete non-believer, which is incredibly surprising to say the least. To be honest, after looking over the spot, my exact hand shouldn't be in that bluffing range. I definitely don't ever expect ace 9 to make it to showdown facing this kind of aggression, but after studying a bit more of the bluff candidates, I think they should really be limited to some backdoor flush holdings, so when we do hold Jack 10 offsuit like we do in this scenario, we want a board with 2 diamonds or 2 hearts. On the rainbow boards, we definitely want to see suited hands be making this kind of play. Definitely unfortunate to get caught, but bluffing is a part of the game, so moving on. Next up, we're on the button with my third favorite hand, pocket queens. There's a middle position open to 30, the low jack calls, and the cutoff calls. We have a pretty straightforward 3-bet candidate, so I make a raise to 170. The initial raiser folds, the low jack calls, and the cutoff is the same player from the pocket jacks hand earlier, and hasn't slowed down his involvement, so he shrugs and puts in the call as well. The flop is 5-4-4, and to my surprise, the low jack decides to lead for a little under half his stack for 350. He's a middle-aged guy in his mid-50s who has generally played pretty passively, and based on his initial call of 30 followed by his second call of my re-raise, I'm expecting to see him have a lot of middling pocket pairs here, especially when he leads this flop at a 3-bet pot. The cutoff puts in a call, only leaving about 200 behind. This isn't the first time he's played a hand in this way, so I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, but with a hand as strong as mine, with the flop this low, and the stack sizes, I think it's best to just go ahead and get it all in now. So I go ahead and go all in. Low jack calls, and the cutoff calls as well. The runout is the 6 of spades and the king of spades, and the low jack flips over pocket 8s, so we were pretty spot on with ranging him. And the cutoff proudly announces it's mine and rolls over the old 5-4 offsuit for the flopped boat. Moving on, the low jack, aka Mr. 5-4, opens to 30. We're in the hijack with pocket 7s, and even though this isn't normally a hand I like to 3-bet pre-flop, I like the idea of guaranteeing my position as well as isolating him, so I put in a raise to 100, and he calls. The flop is kind of nice. It's 9-8-6. So even though we miss our set, we still have plenty of equity with an open-ender, so I continue for 130, and he calls. The turn is the jack of clubs, which is unfortunate because not only do we miss our draw, but it also downgrades our draw quite a bit, because even if we hit a 10, any queen beats us now. So for that reason, I decide to check this one back. The river pair's the bottom card, so we find no improvement, and he decides to bet small for 150. Pretty unfortunate situation, but this is a hand we're just going to have to let go because I don't beat much of anything at this point. Nice hand, sir. About 45 minutes later, we see an open to 30 from middle position. It folds around to us in the big blind, and we look down at pocket queens once again. Certainly a premium worth putting in another bet, so I 3-bet to 120, and he makes the call. The flop is decent. It's queen jack 9 with 2 hearts, so we flop a set, but I think there are plenty of hands that he could have that hit this flop and might consider a bet, so I decide to check with the intention of check raising, but unfortunately he checks it back. The turn isn't the best. It's the 4 of hearts, so the flush draw does come in. I'd expect to see a bet from most flush draw holdings on the flop at this level, so I'm not exactly worried that he improved to a flush, but I can't afford to miss any more value with this hand, so I put in a bet of 130, and he calls. The river bricks out, so I'm confident we still have the best hand. I think it's unlikely we'll be getting called for any sizing by a hand that missed a draw, including some of the 1-pair holdings even. However, we should still get called by some of the 2-pair possibilities like queen jack and jack 9 for a larger size. So I put in a bet of 310, but unfortunately he folds pretty quickly. In the same orbit, we're on the button with ace-king off, and the hijack opens to 30. The splashy player to our right makes the call in the cutoff, and I elect to 3-bet once again to 120. The hijack says,
I am just frozen out for seeing flops.
and folds. And because the guy to our right hasn't seen a hand he doesn't like for just about any price, he makes the call. The flop is 8 high, so we miss, but I decide to continue for about 1/3 pot, as I would with most holdings as a 3-better, and he calls. The turn is the 4 of clubs and brings in the flush draw, so even though we pick up a gutter, I'm ready to switch into equity realization mode at this point without a club in my hand. I still have some showdown value, but based on what we've seen from this guy so far, He's certainly not afraid to mix it up with a number of holdings that connect with this board somehow. The river pairs the top card and brings a fourth club, so when he bets 150, there's nothing really to do here but go ahead and make the fold. Kind of annoying that we can't seem to beat this guy, but I keep holding out hope that it'll happen eventually. Next up, it folds around to us on the button, and we open to 40 with King-9 offsuit, and the big blind defends. The flop is pretty dynamic. It's 9-8-3 with a couple spades, so we flop a pretty strong top pair and bet on the larger side for 50, and he makes the call. The turn is pretty great. It's the king of hearts, so we improved a top two pair, and I think it's somewhat of a brick enough turn to go for an overbet. So I bet 220, and he folds. Obviously wanted to call, but at this point in the session, I'm happy to take a pot down. In this one, we see an open to 30 from early position and a middle position call. I'm in the low jack with pocket nines, and we put in a call as well. The cutoff, however, doesn't think 30 is enough. He thinks for a bit and decides to put in a raise to $240. The initial raiser folds. As expected, the player on our right makes the call, and I'll be honest, this sizing is notably large. In-game, I can't help but feel this is one of those weird sizings a recreational player might use with something like pocket jacks or tens because they don't want to play it post-flop. But that said, I think this price is too good, especially with the guy on our right in the hand. So I make the call as well. The flop is Queen 8-3 with a couple diamonds, so we miss our set, unfortunately, and it checks over to the pre-flop aggressor. He puts in a bet of 250, and the player on our right folds. This is a noticeable sizing deviation from his past hands at the table. I haven't seen him bet anything under half pot on any street up until this point, so even though I don't have a ton of data to work with, my gut is telling me he's on the weaker side when he uses this small sizing, so I make the call once again. The turn is the biggest brick in the deck in the form of the deuce of clubs, and I check it over once again. He elects to use the exact same sizing once again, putting in a bet of 250. Again, this is a noticeable deviation from the action he's taken in every other hand I've seen played. I've learned that normally when a player uses the same sizing over multiple streets, especially when they're deviating from their normal behavior, that they're just not loving the way the hand is playing out and they're a lot weaker than expected. I think about it for a bit and take into account the noticeably large 3-bet sizing pre-flop, followed by the noticeably small flop bet and even smaller turn bet relative to the size of the pot, and ultimately convince myself he's just got pocket jacks, pocket tens, or ace-king. It's a super narrow range, but I can't help but feel that if I put it all in for about 1,300, he'll be in the blender and won't be able to call off. So I go ahead and go all in. We fade the snap call, so that's a great sign. And now we're just hoping to see a fold. And after tanking for a few minutes, he folds. Pocket jacks face up. Nice. No, I'm just kidding. He thinks about it for 10 seconds total. Before flipping in a chip and asking if we can run it twice, I oblige. We don't improve on either river, and we end up losing to pocket tens. Nice hand, sir. I go ahead and rebuy for the max and open low jack to 30 with pocket jacks. Cutoff calls and a good pro in the small blind, 3 bets to 150. I'm not loving it, but I call, and we go to the flop heads up, which is king, 8, 2 diamonds. He makes a standard c-bet for a small sizing of 100, and I don't think we have any other option but to call and evaluate the turn, which is the 7 of hearts. He checks it this time, so I'm relatively confident he doesn't have a king, and now I'm just hoping he has a hand worse than ours. I bet 250 to deny equity from hands involving an ace or a queen, and to take away the betting lead with the intention of checking back most rivers, and he makes the call. The river is a third king, so when he checks, I stick to the plan and land on a check as well. I don't think we'll ever be getting called by a worse hand, and he shows us the bad news of pocket queens. Just one of those days. Next, we see an open to 30 from hijack and a call from the cutoff. I'm in the big blind with a very playable hand, pocket sixes. So I make the call and we see a pretty beautiful flop, ace 7-6 with a couple clubs. I check it over and it gets around to the cutoff, who puts in a bet of $50. This is our moment, guys. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to make our way out of Stuckville. Population me. I make a pretty straightforward check raise to 180, hoping an ace finds a call and everyone folds. Love it. Grinding along, I open to 30 from the cutoff with pocket tens. The button and both of the blinds make the call. The flop is ace-6 rainbow, and when we're this multi-way, it's probably best to check the flop, so I check it over to the button, and he puts in a bet of $50. Folds to me, and I make the call. The turn is the 4 of clubs, bringing a backdoor flush draw, and he bets $50 once again. This is the same opponent from the pocket nines versus pocket tens hand, so I'm pretty convinced this is a really weak holding when he uses the same turn sizing once again, but I elect to just call to keep his bluffs in there. The river is the 3 of spades, so we avoid all over cards, but it does bring in 4 to a straight. I check it over once again, planning to put in a call if he bets. It doesn't come down to that, though, as he checks back by tabling 6 deuce of diamonds, so happy to win this one.
Good game, Nate. See you around.
Pretty shortly after, Mr. 5-4 busts, and half the table gets up and leaves following his departure. So the table breaks, and we move to another game, where I'm informed they're playing a mandatory straddle. We're only 6-handed in this hand, so I'm first to act in middle position and look down at pocket kings and open it up to $60. The cutoff puts in a 3-bet to 210, and it folds back around to me. He only has about $550 in his stack, so when he commits nearly half of his remaining chips, I assume he's never folding. I go ahead and go all in. He calls, and we see a run out of ace-king 8-8 brick, and we end up cooling off pocket queens, so pretty pleased to finally find some run good and win a little bit of our money back. I'm still stuck about 2,400 at this point, and soon after, this straddle game breaks, my phone dies, and I grind out another hour at a different table before calling it a night.
So it is about 10 till 4 in the morning. We just finished up playing about 8.5 hours. Ended up only losing 670. So that last hand that I got on camera, I was still stuck quite a bit. I think I was stuck about 2,400. But my phone ended up dying, and I wasn't able to go ahead and film this last hand that ended up getting us a lot of the way unstuck. We still, like I said, ended up losing about 670, but the hand was, I was in the small blind with pocket aces, ace of clubs, ace of diamonds. Early position, +1, opens to 30, and the button puts in a 3-bet to 90. I go ahead and put in the cold 4-bet to 270, and +1 puts in the 5-bet to 750. Button folds, comes back to us. Kind of an awkward position to figure out here for me. 6-betting is pretty much obvious that we just have aces. I don't think any other hand just puts a 6-bet in. But if I just call with aces and the flop is ace high or it's king high, we're at a really awkward stack depth, and I would hate for my opponent to somehow get away from kings or queens. So I go ahead and just jam it all in for about 1855, if I recall correctly, and he thinks for a minute and then ends up putting in the call. Flop is 5-3 deuce with 2 diamonds, 8 of diamonds, and then a king rolls off, which we don't love, but it's the king of diamonds, so luckily we end up with the nuts. He flashes us the queen of diamonds, so he was in there with queens, and we get the double up. We go from 1855 to 38 and some change after the 90 from the button, so happy to get that cooler in to kind of make up for some of the boneheaded plays I made. We probably didn't have to bluff the Jack 10 offsuit hand. I didn't have to bluff the pocket nines hand. And obviously having queens against 5-4 offsuit in a 3-bet pot is pretty unfortunate. But yeah, I think I took some aggressive lines that I didn't necessarily need to. But hey, it happens. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. So thanks again for swinging by and sticking around, and we'll catch you next time.